You know, in the world, knowledge is king. If you've got, in education, if you know things, wow, that's fantastic. But in the kingdom of God, relationship is king. And there, just at that time, the time to worship God, I really loved that last song that Jill just brought to us. Wow. Amazing. A song that was probably written hundreds, I don't know how long ago it was, but what power and meaning to it. And relationship is king. There is nobody like our Jesus. He is amazing. I don't know about you, but I sort of dip in and out of daily devotion things and all sorts of different things. And anyway, there was a good number of weeks ago now, because often I look at things and I think, yeah, that's really good. But then, sort of an hour later, you've forgotten about it. It's a bit like that with things like that. But I was looking at one and it really didn't leave me. And I'm talking about a few weeks ago now. And it hasn't left me. And when it came to preparing something for today, I knew exactly what I was going to speak on. I knew exactly, without a shadow of a doubt, what I was going to speak on. Because if it speaks to me, the chances are God's got more than me he wants to speak to. He wants you as well. So there we go. The title, I'm really rubbish with titles. Honestly, I just don't know. But anyway, so the title of this is King of Glory, Servant King. And I'm going to start reading a wonderful piece of scripture from Mark 9. I should have told Sean and Amy, sorry about that. It's Mark 9, and it's verses 2 to 8, and it's about the transfiguration. And it says, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him, and he led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. And then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. And suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they'd seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. I thought about mountains, and we've been on holiday 3 times to Tenerife. And you sort of think of Tenerife, you sort of picture probably beaches and, sitting on a lounger. But Tenerife has been like a hidden gem for the Germans, a walking gem for many, many years. And often when you go there and you're walking out in the mountains, it's often Germans that you come across, not English people. It's funny that, isn't it? But they've kept it to themselves, and why not? I'm sure I'd do exactly the same. And I think that's the reason we've sort of gone back, really, because we spent most of our time walking, and it's a beautiful place. There's, if you go up to where Mount Teide is, and you go walking there, it's just like a lunar landscape, blues and greens, of the sandy thing around. And it's gorgeous, and all these beautiful sculptures, naturally formed sculptures that, you can stand next to them, and they're just sort of huge, really huge. And you think, wow, how small am I? But I think the things that I've enjoyed most are when we've gone into places like the Anaga Mountains and other mountain regions. And though the climbs are jolly hard, really, really difficult, and you think, I want to turn around, and I've said that so many times, I want to turn around, I don't want to do this. But you get to the top, and there is nothing, I've never experienced anything like it, to get the views. I can remember one, we were walking along a little ridge, and on one side of the ridge, it was just mountains as far as you could see, but it was very arid and barren, but huge and majestic. And you turned around, and on the other side, there was the laurel and the heathers and the sea. And going down the mountain to the sea, it was just green and it was stunning. And then we walked a little bit further along, and you're walking along a little pathway, and there's a massive drop. And you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful, because if you fell, it wouldn't be, I don't know how on earth you'd get up. So you feel a bit nervous, and I'm saying, be careful, Marj. Watch what you're doing. Stop looking at the scenery. Stop looking at the scenery. So I'd be stopping every now and again and looking. But you just stood there, and it's quiet because there's hardly anybody about. And you just realise how small you are and how amazing and huge God is, because this scenery blows your mind. But the person beyond the scenery, the one who created it, really blows your mind. And suddenly, sometimes we think we're so big, but you know what? We're tiny in comparison. And they've just been lovely. And it was really funny. I think it was the last one we went on, and we were going up, and we were completely inappropriately thing. We just wear shorts and t-shirts and have a bottle of water, as you do. And I sort of found this big staff to help me up, as I'm going. And they're wonderful to have a stick. And I remember getting to the top. And there was this little group of men, and, they got the jackets and the backpacks and the poles and everything else. And they were really impressed with us. They were saying, wow, you're the real deal, sort of coming out. They were sort of up there, and everybody had the stuff on, and we were there just sort of walking on with a stick. And it was really funny. But anyway, hey-ho, there we go. But Jesus took the disciples up a high mountain. And he didn't just, I'm going to change that word, he led the disciples up a high mountain. Isn't that lovely? God is leading us, and he's leading all of us to that place, to that high mountain with him. And this was a place where they got a glimpse of the heavenly Jesus on earth. For that split moment, the veil of Jesus' humanity was lifted, and they saw him in all of his glory. Wow, you can see the dazzling white, whiter than the world could bleach, and all that glory that was there. And they saw it, and it was something that they would never forget, ever, to experience such an amazing thing. And in 2 Peter chapter 1, this is what Peter said, and this is way afterwards. He said, for we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, this is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased. We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on that sacred mountain. And it's all about knowing him, not knowing about him, but it's knowing him. And just like Peter and James and John being led into a high place with God, is where God's leading us to be, isn't it? To the places, and we've all got memories of times when we've been in that presence with God, and and he speaks to us. We speak to him, and he speaks to us. And he just reveals things to our spirits, of things that he wants to talk about our lives and all sorts of things. But when difficult times come, it's often those times that you've encountered Jesus on the heights that really stay with you, and they help you in difficult times. And this was all one, that relationship. You see, Peter, James, and John, they were led, and they saw something that nobody else saw. But what Jesus did on the cross for us, he saw that everybody can see it. All of us can see it. And we can, sort of share that hope that everybody can know that intimate relationship with Christ. And when we're in that close place alone with God, the views are amazing. We just see him, like I said, up that mountain. We see him, how glorious and majestic and mighty he is. And often the circumstances of life that weigh us down and make us feel stressed, when we get into that place with God, suddenly it's like looking down on something and you're not there, because suddenly you realize that the one who created the earth, the one who created me, is more than able to meet the needs that are there. He's more than able. And it's just seeing it from his perspective and just being able to get into that place of peace. Christ is always depicted as a bridegroom, and we are the bride. And just as marriage is a joining of two lives together, such an intimate relationship needs time spent alone together. When you get married, and even as you go through life, being one, you need to be on your own. You couldn't possibly work out your marriage just in a crowd of people. And it's the same with our God. We can come together as a group, and we need that, and it's great, and we can encourage and pray like we have done this morning, and pray and share and bless each other. But this really is a time when we're bringing together the 24/7, the times with God that is with us right throughout our lives. And we do need to be in that place of real intimacy with him. Not just, we could never ever be fed just by turning up on a Sunday and listening to somebody speak. It's only when we know him. We know him. I was looking at Habakkuk. I'll just turn to it if I can. I'll read it from here. I thought this was great. I'll read it. I'll just read the one verse. I'll read around it. And Habakkuk said, "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and he enables me to go to the heights." And around that, he's talking about being allowed to go into the heights with God. But just before that, it says, it's very familiar. It says, "Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crops fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen," whoa, this is painting a horrible picture, "and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Saviour." And why can he do that? Because he goes on to say, "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and he enables me to go on the heights." Amazing. Now then, I'm going to come back to the Transfiguration now. And in the account with Jesus, we read that Moses and Elijah were there with Jesus. Amazing men of God. You've got the giver of the law to the people and the prophet. And these men had also, I was looking around it, they'd had encounters with God in high places. And the ones I'm going to share are all in the same place. I know one says Mount Sinai, but I looked it up and it said Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are actually, they say they think they're the same place. And Mount Horeb is known as the mountain of God. And so Moses in Exodus 4, when he encountered God on Mount Sinai, when he went up there to receive the 10 Commandments, and he spent, I don't know if this has sort of skipped me, but he spent 40 days and 40 nights in the presence of God, and he didn't eat or drink. He was sustained by God. And when he came down from those 40 days and 40 nights, his face shone. And he was just reflecting all he'd seen from being, all he'd experienced from being in the presence of God. And it just shone out of him. He completely shone. And in fact, he had to put a veil over his face just by being in the presence of God. You know, we see him again. Well, this was before in Exodus 3, when he was looking after his father-in-law Jethro's flock again at Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And he saw the burning bush and that wasn't consumed, and he went across and God spoke to him there and revealed to him that he was going to be used to set the Israelites free from slavery in Egypt. It was also on Mount Horeb where Moses asked to see God's glory, and where God passed before him, and God said, well, anybody who sees my face, they couldn't possibly live. I mean, you look at the sun, and we're all told not to stare at the sun because it could affect our eyes. But, I mean, the sun is one of, I don't know, billions of suns, I don't know how many. But to see that the glory of the person who created the suns, you know, God said, there's no way, you can't see my face and live. But what he said was, you know what, I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock, and I'm going to put my hand there, and I'll pass by. My presence will pass by before you, and then you'll see my back. Amazing. And then Elijah, again on Mount Horeb. Again, I think I thought it was probably better to read this bit. Yeah, and he was on Mount Horeb, and this was after the prophets of Baal, and he'd slaughtered them all, and that big event there. And he was then fleeing for his own life, and this is what he says. He says, the Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword, and I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Again, very similar, isn't it? And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And Elijah recognized the voice of God. You know, he recognized, the presence of God. He recognized it in that gentle whisper. He knew that God was there. All these great things had happened, but he didn't recognize God in it. You know, you might have seen it, you're thinking, wind, wow, that would tear mountains apart. Surely God's in that. But when God was there, he knew that he was there. He was in no shadow of a doubt, and it was in a gentle whisper. And it said, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went and stood at the mouth of the cave. And that was where he got direction, and God said, he was in a terrible place, he was fearful. And he said, and God had said, you know, go back the way you came, Elijah. And he gave him that word. And God desires alone time with us. He wants to develop that personal relationship with us. You know, he created us as individuals. We're all different. I love it, you know. People are fascinating. They really are. I like being around people, actually. I find them totally interesting, and they are so different. But as Psalm 139 says, he knit us together in our mother's wombs. He made us just as we are, and he likes us. We don't always like ourselves, but he likes us. He loves us. And he knows all sorts of things about us. He knows about how many hairs we've got on our heads. I mean, what intimate detail is that? And he knows, I'll be here all day, wouldn't I? And, you know, even though he knows all the sparrows individually, we have a little community of sparrows in our garden, and they're lovely. We love them because they're all interactive. They're not birds on their own, they're community birds. But he says, you're worth more than many sparrows. And he invites us to come and know him. And when we desire to know God intimately, we will spend time with him. It's just natural. If you want to know somebody intimately, you will spend time with them. You'll want to spend time with them. And as John shared last week about Mary, things needed doing, and she'd have known that. But you know what? She thought, I can't miss this opportunity. I want to be listening to Jesus. And as we hunger and thirst we will be filled. A bit further on the transfiguration in verse 7 it says, then a cloud, and Matthew records this, in Mark it just says a cloud, but Matthew records it as a bright cloud, appeared and enveloped them. And the cloud, in the Old Testament, it was a cloud that represented the presence of God, that when the cloud moved, the Israelites moved. And here, this is symbolizing that when Jesus was there with Moses and Elijah, he was enveloped in God's presence. God was saying he's with him. And this is when God speaks from the cloud and he said, this is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. And when I've read all about this, about experiencing the awesome greatness of God, I just want to be there. I really want to be there. But it's interesting that I think it's about 6 chapters later, we see Jesus very differently. Very, very differently. And I'm going to read from Mark 15, 22 to 39. And this is the same Jesus that was revealed as his veil of humanity was removed for that brief moment. This is the same Jesus. And they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him, and the written notice of charge against him read, the King of the Jews. They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on the right and one on his left, and those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, so, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself. And in the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him amongst themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross, that we may see and believe. And those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. And at noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And when some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and they put it on a staff, and they offered it to Jesus to drink. No, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. And with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. At the Transfiguration, they climbed up a mountain. They were led up a mountain, away from the crowd. At the crucifixion, I'm led to believe that it was all at the base of hills and things, and it said in here that the people passing by, those who passed by, hurled insults. So Jesus was in quite a different place from being alone with God. Now he's where the crowds are, walking by. On the mountainside, Jesus appeared in all his glory for all to see, the brightness, the dazzling. Here at Golgotha, the place of the skull, he appeared as shame, in complete shame. A criminal's death, hanging on the cross for all to mock and jeer. And shame's a horrible thing. And just to be there and nothing you can do and people walking by, how horrible. At the Transfiguration, he appeared in dazzling white clothes, brighter than anyone could bleach them. But here he's seen naked. His clothes were stripped away by men who made a game of it. It says that they cast lots to see what each one would get. There we saw his face shining like the sun. But here his face would have been bruised and marred and covered in blood from the crown that he was made to wear, the thorny crown. On the mountain he was seen with Moses and Elijah, men who experienced God in mighty ways. But here we see Jesus counted amongst two robbers. People, scum, I would imagine that people would call them. That's a word we use today. Reviled, disgusted. And he was there. And that's what people would have thought and would have, you can imagine. It's horrible. It's even when people look at people who are scum, or who we would class as in our society as scum, even that, to see people looking with complete hatred on somebody is not a pleasant, even though they, you could say they deserve it. There's always more to things than meets the eye. But it's not nice. It's not nice. There he was honoured by Peter. He wanted to build a shelter for Jesus and for Moses and Elijah. And here he's jeered and mocked. And he had to listen to all the insults and the clever words, even using words that he said about the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days, but not being able to say anything. And that is horrible, that, when people say things and you can't say anything. He couldn't defend himself. There we see the bright cloud, the presence of God, covering him, enhancing his glory. But what do we see here? It says there was darkness, and Jesus was totally forsaken and alone for that moment. He was completely alone, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? On the mountain where he was affirmed, this is my son whom I love. Here it's a Roman soldier who says, surely this man was the Son of God. And we all need to be alone with God on the mountainside. We all need to be led there and to spend time there. That's really, really, really important. But we also need to be there in his sufferings, and we need to be there with the crowds in life like Jesus was, the people walking by just on the same level as everyone else. Jesus gave his life for us. We need to give our lives for others. We need to be willing to be servants. Not for any, in fact, I think some of the best servants are the ones who do it and you don't know anything about it. But just servants who don't want any reward, they don't want any accolade, they don't want anybody patting them on the back, they don't want to say, look at me. But genuine servants. And servanthood looks different to everybody. We cannot make comparisons with regards to servanthood. You don't know somebody else's life. You do not walk. We all wear shoes, but we don't wear the same shoes. And we can be so wrong in judging what we perceive to be servants. And Jesus, when he was there, being obedient to the Father, he said, let this cup pass away from me, but not as I will, but as you will. And as we live lives of obedience to God, and we live lives of sacrifice, we'll have times where we have to endure rejection, misunderstanding, feelings of isolation. We'll all do it, all of us. You cannot walk in obedience with God and everybody think you're amazing all the time. It doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. And we've got to be like Jesus, there saying nothing. And it's hard. Not defending ourselves. But I think it's at times like that that we realise, you know what, this life is not about me. I always like it to think it's about me, and I do that too often, far, far, far too often. But this life is not about me. It isn't. It's about God. It's about others. And it's about sharing what I've received from God, which is amazing, and sharing it with others. And love is, I think, the strongest power there is. You know, even a silly thing like a smile can make a difference to somebody who's broken-hearted. You know, somebody, we don't know how one another feels, but sometimes even a smile, a kind word can just melt all and just make you feel better for the whole day. And genuine, selfless love allows God to be seen in us, and it leads people to Christ. You know, up the mountainside, James, Peter and John were given orders not to tell anybody. But following Jesus' resurrection, everything changed. You know, he paid the price. He was victorious. He was up, sort of raised from the dead. Amazing, victorious Jesus. And in Mark 16, he says, "Go into all the world and preach the good news to all creation." And we've got good news. At the place where I work as a volunteer, there's a group that I've been seeing one by one for probably easily a year, that are completely untouched by the gospel, show very little interest in faith, but I've seen them week after week after week, sometimes just talking about nothing, general chit-chat, sometimes just listening, sometimes sharing faith, sometimes praying for people. And but you know, there comes a time where I felt really compelled in my spirit. You've got to invite them along to a church group. You've got to invite them. And I didn't want to do it because I thought they're just going to say no, and I'll feel really rejected, and I won't like that because I've built up a relationship, you know. But I did, and I went round and I invited them along. And the first week I was astonished when 8 people turned up. And the second week I was more astonished as I walked in. I said, "You'll need more chairs than that." I didn't expect even the 8 to turn up, but I hardly put any chairs out. And 10 turned up. And last week there were 20 people there. And one person said to me, he said, "Well, could you invite my friend?" And I went to see his friend, and he said, "This person wants me to come more than I do." He said, "I've got no faith. I don't believe in God." And I said, "Well, if you want to come along, it's entirely up to you, but, you know, come and give it a go." And then the other person was just stood by him and saying, "Yeah, you need to come, you need to come, you need to come." And, you know, it just takes that, sometimes just getting out of our comfort zone, or certainly did for me. And in Matthew 9 it says, "Seeing the people, Jesus felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest.'" And as I said before, we need to go up into the mountainside, but we've also got to get out there. Peter, James and John were there at the Transfiguration along with God, experiencing his amazing glory, but their lives of service took them on very different routes. I looked up on the 3 of them, and Peter was crucified. It's thought that he was crucified upside down. James was beheaded. And John was exiled, and he was left to grow old. He was the last one of the group. And that can be hard. I know people who've grown old, and everybody's, the friends and the people that they've associated with all their lives have gotten and died. And they're the only one. And it can be heartbreaking for them to suddenly feel that they've got nothing. And so John's, albeit you might think he lived to be a good old life, I'm sure it was very difficult for him. But Peter, James and John gave their best for the one who gave his all for them. Let's go and do likewise. Amen.